You see that guy? That's me. Hi, I'm Alex, and I've been climbing for over a year now. I started climbing on March 11th of 2019, and I fell in love with it from the very start. I started climbing at a local bouldering gym, and the second day I went into that place, I went ahead and bought a membership because I was so sure that this is what I wanted to do. Once I had the membership, I was pretty much in there every day, if not every other day, and a lot of the times climbing even twice in a day. I pretty much started living in the gym and just climbing and climbing and climbing and doing all these cool things I'd never done before. Luckily for me, I feel like I got a pretty good head start as a beginner because I'm 6 foot tall. I have a pretty lean frame, so I'm like, tall and lanky, and I was able to progress through the grades pretty fast at first. This is gonna sound ridiculous, but I actually did a V4 in my first day climbing. It wasn't super hard. Looking back on it, it was pretty soft, but it was still a huge confidence boost in myself and in my ability to climb and try out this new sport I'd never tried before. Continuing with that theme, I also did a V6 in my first month of climbing. It was towards the very end of the first month, but I was able to do a V6 as a beginner who had never climbed before, or at least not rock climbed in any way. And once again, it was a very soft climb for the grade, and it was on slab, but the idea that I had just started in this sport and I was able to progress so fast just gave me this huge confidence boost. The climbing got me hooked, but it was the community and the people that I met through climbing that made the whole experience just that much better. I've met some amazing people, some great friends that I'm sure I will have for a very long time. Like I mentioned before, I was climbing a lot, way too much for my own good, and eventually all this progress that I had would catch up with me. About 2 months into my climbing, I started getting these aches in my elbow. Well, like every climber knows, if you don't take care of yourself, tendonitis is going to come knocking on your door and it's not going to be fun. So 2 months into my climbing, I got hit with good old case of tendonitis, and I had to slow down and just, take it easier. So I did. And for about a month and a half, month or two, I just started just going to the gym and working out, just hanging out with my friends and climbing on warm-ups. So never exceeding V2 or V3. And I did that for a good little time until about June, when I got my first opportunity to go outside and climb on real rock. This was an absolute turning point in my climbing. My good friend Vince took me to Black Mountain on a overnight camping / climbing trip. I was still somewhat recovering from my tendonitis, but once I got on that mountain and I saw these boulders and I saw the climbing and watched my friends climb, it completely went away. The stoke took over my body and I just climbed and climbed and climbed and loved every second of it. I learned so much about climbing on that trip. Also, Black Mountain has an amazing view and a beautiful scenery, and just coupled that with the climbing, I was hooked and my life changed from that day on. On that climbing trip, I was also able to do my first V4 outside, which was super, super encouraging. I did the Chief, which is really proud face line that's really quirky and just a super fun climb. If you're ever in Black Mountain, I definitely suggest it. After that Black Mountain trip, my focus on climbing changed. I would still go to the gym almost every other day, but I was no longer climbing hard. I especially due to my tendonitis, I did not want to climb really hard in the gym and then not be able to go outside because of it. So I basically would work out during the week and work on resting myself. And then on the weekends, I would go all out outside, whether I go to Black, whether I go with friends, or even if I had to go by myself. I bought my own pads and I got out there. My stoke completely came from outside at this point in my climbing. And I mean, that philosophy I kind of still hold to this day. I don't really project stuff indoors. I'm not super stoked on plastic. I basically just train during the week, and then when the weekend comes, I go outside and I will give it everything I have. And then I'll rest the whole week again. I'll train and repeat. And that's basically where I'm at right now. Early December, a couple of my friends and I were planning to go to Black and camp out for a weekend and climb, kind of how we normally did. But then disaster struck. Southern California got hit with their first winter storm of the season, and Black Mountain, being at 7,000 plus feet of elevation, got covered in snow. We were still super stoked on going outside and climbing and camping out if possible, so we redirected to good old Joshua Tree National Park. This opened a whole new can of worms for me. In the eyes of a climber, Joshua Tree is a majestic place. The climbing there is endless. Around the same time that I discovered Joshua Tree, I also went through a bit of a heartbreak, and it just put me in a spot where I needed something to distract me, and I just needed something to focus on. Shortly after this, Vince introduced me to this boulder in Joshua Tree called John Backer Memorial Face Problem, or JBMFP for short. It is a V5 face climb on super sharp crimps all the way up. Well, most of the way up. And I got absolutely obsessed over this climb. I made it my goal, my mission, to do this climb. I went every single weekend for a month straight. I drove to Joshua Tree every single weekend from December 9th till mid-January, attempting this climb. Every Saturday morning, I'd get there, I would warm up, and I would session that climb either until my fingers would bleed or until my friends wanted to climb something else. I learned every little bit of microbeta there is for that climb, for myself at least. And luckily, on January 18th, I finally got the send on that climb, and it felt absolutely amazing. It was my first V5 outdoors that I had ever done, and I actually ended up doing my second V5 outdoors ever with Mystical Vibrations, which is completely different style of climbing, but that day I was just feeling it and I was able to do it. I was really happy to have done this climb. I dedicated so much time to it and so much effort, but that happiness didn't really last very long. You see, JBMFP gave me something to focus on when I felt like I was at my lowest. Now, I was left with a void to fill. This is when I decided to start highballing. I have to be completely honest and say that I went into this whole situation with a very I have nothing to lose mentality. I wasn't trying to hurt myself by any means, but I was also being ignorant to the possibility. I knew that I was a decent climber and I trusted myself. So I got to climbing. The first highball I did was Betty Joe Yablonsky. This climb was smooth sailing up until I got to what I would consider the crux. Here, I got scared. I was 15 plus feet off the floor, and I couldn't figure out the beta to get me past this section. I felt exposed, my hands started sweating, and my feet started shaking. I sat under the crux of the climb for about a minute, just trying to gather myself. Finally, I committed myself to the move and everything fell in place. Then, I made the walk over to false up 20. This climb was a whole different challenge for me. As a boulderer, I had little to no experience with cracks and lie backing, so to me, nothing felt secure after the first 10 feet. Once again, my hands got sweaty and my feet got shaky, but I worked my way as high as I could, and I did the brain-dense boulder thing to do and just shot for the lip. It wasn't a pretty send of the climb, but it was a send nonetheless. I was glad that I did these 2 climbs, but I was also mad at myself for reacting how I did when I was on the climbs. My head game was weak, and I knew I had to work on it. The next weekend, my friend Cameron and I planned out a trip where we were just going to go and do high balls only, just the 2 of us. We had 3 main climbs in our mind. Mileti, a V3, Slash Face, a V3, and White Rastafarian, a V2. We started our day with Mileti, and I have to say, it was a good way to start the day. We simply walked up, set up our pads, and flashed it. It was a nice little climb, and I would definitely do it again, especially since I never got a picture or video on it. Then, we moved on to Slash Face. We made the trek out to this beautiful boulder, and the first thing we noticed when we got there was how towering it was. Regardless, we set up our pads and warmed up. Cameron gave it the first couple goes to no luck. Then I figured I'd give it a try. I chalked up and messed up the starting sequence, falling before the crux. Disencouraged by the fact that I wouldn't be flashing the climb, I just jumped right back on it without rechalking. This time, I did the start sequence perfectly. I got to the crux and pulled through a super insecure hold. Once I passed that, it was the most satisfying climbing I have ever done. It was basically just climbing on a ladder 20 plus feet off the floor. I can't explain how stoked I was to have sent this on my second try. It honestly didn't even feel real. Shortly after this, Cameron got his send of the climb, so we both hyped each other up and made our way to White Rastafarian. Luckily for me, Cameron had already done this climb in the past, so he gave me some starting beta and I had nothing left but to do the climb. I hopped on it and just let my body do the climbing. Everything felt great up until I got past the crux. My wrists started cramping right before the top out. Falling at this height would have been very, very bad, so I kept my cool and climbed through it. I had some small hiccups on the top out, but other than that, it was a clean send. This day changed everything for me. From the last weekend to this day, it seemed as if a switch had flipped in my head. Not once on the climbs did I get scared. Not once did I get shaky hands and feet. I officially had a strong head game. Even with the cramping hand, I didn't get nervous. I felt like a completely different person after this day. It was well into February around this time, and I realized that I only had about a month until I reached my 1-year anniversary climbing. A lot of people had asked me if I had any goals for myself for my 1-year anniversary, and I hadn't really put much thought into it. I thought about it for a bit and told myself that a good goal would be to get my first V6 climb outdoors and do one of what I think is the coolest boulders in Joshua Tree, period. This is when I set my goal on Planet X. Planet X is a 20 plus foot boulder which features a dyno right in the middle of it. When I chose to make this climb my goal, I had never tried the climb. I had seen people do it. I had seen people attempt it, but I had never touched the rock myself. I always thought that it was above my grade and I had to train before I could get there. And honestly, I was kind of scared of it. This was my new project. I knew this wasn't going to be like White Rastafarian or Slash Face where I can just walk up to it and do it. I knew it was going to be JBMFP Part 2. It was going to be a project, and it was going to take blood and sweat and effort to do. It wasn't going to come easy. So once again, I started obsessing over this climb. I felt like I had no time to lose, especially since I'd only given myself about a month to actually do the climb. I knew that it was going to be hard, so every weekend I would go to this specific climb and try that dyno over and over and over and over. I would fall over and over and over and over. Every Sunday morning, I would wake up, my knees in pain, my back in pain, my ankles swollen. I was completely destroying myself, but I'd rest all week and go back on Saturday. And I did this for a month straight. On average, every Saturday I went to this climb, I put in 20 plus attempts. My body hated me. Finally, it came down to the last day that I would have an opportunity to try and do this climb before my first year. It was a Monday after already trying the climb all day on the previous Saturday. So my skin was already in horrible condition, and this was really just the last ditch effort to try and get this climb. I gave that climb everything I had. I put in all the effort I could possibly put in. I went to the point where 4 of my fingertips were bleeding. And even then, I taped up and tried again. I tried as hard as I could. I pushed myself beyond what I thought I could push myself. I knew that with the condition that my skin was in, I wouldn't be able to do this climb. And so I decided to go ahead and call it a day. It was a huge bummer, and it still is, but I was still one of the best climbing spots in the world, so I wasn't going to let that put a damper to my day. I went ahead and did some climbs that I had on my list and had an amazing time. There was no pressure. It was all easy climbing. It was all just bucket list climbs that I wanted to do. I went ahead and did these climbs, and then I found a climb that I on-sighted. I still have no idea what the climb's name is or what the grade of the climb is. It just gave me this huge feeling of fulfillment. Since I wasn't able to do my first V6 this day, I wanted to shoot for another goal of mine, which was to get my third V5 outdoors. So after doing all these easier high balls this day, I said, let's try and do this V5. Let's see if we can pull it off. It should be a lot easier than Planet X, and I should be able to pull on it. So I made the hike over to Iron Meteorite, also known as Kingpin of V5. I spent about 4 to 5 hours at this climb, trying it over and over and over again. It was like I was repeating myself. I fell on the last move over and over and over. And I got to the point in this climb where I physically couldn't pull anymore. I could grab onto holds and no longer pull myself above them. And I tweaked my knee on one of my falls, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. My body was basically telling me to stop, and For once, I listened, and I did. Once again, I got extremely close but couldn't finish. Leading up to this day, I put a lot of pressure on myself. I set these really high goals for myself and I wasn't able to pull through. However, this is kind of the way I function. I push myself as hard as I can. When I find my limit, I try and push it just a little further. Am I disappointed in myself for not doing these climbs? Yes and no. I know that I have the strength and skill to do both of these climbs. Specifically for Planet X, I know that the main thing I lacked was the full commitment required to catch that dino. Also, I believe I should have given myself a bit more time. It took me over a month of projecting to do JBMFP, but I only gave myself about a month to do Planet X. Anyway, I know that these climbs will always be there for me to do. I don't have a time constraint. If I happen to set one for myself as a personal goal, then of course, I'll do everything to try and achieve that goal. But at the end of the day, Planet X and Iron Meteorite will always be there. I did end that day with a sense of accomplishment. I may have not done what I went there to do, but I know I tried. I know the emotional roller coaster I went through that day, and I know that I'm only going to return better, and I'm going to send those climbs. So, I'm good. Life goes on. There's plenty of climbing left for me to do. I have nothing but things to look forward to. Overall, I'm extremely grateful to have found something that I'm so passionate about. Climbing has enhanced my life in every way possible. I've made countless memories and friends through climbing. To everybody who has climbed with me and helped me when I was new, thank you.